talk about the present, which for me is still Vermilion Drift, because I haven't got the other book out there yet. But I want to talk a little bit about Vermilion Drift, because I had a good time with that book. Vermilion Drift. How many of you have had this experience in your lives? You've come home from a busy day and you really haven't planned anything for dinner, and you open the refrigerator door and you pull out, you've got maybe a bowl of mashed potatoes that's been in there so long it's like paste, and you've got some congealed gravy maybe, and some leathery looking roast beef, and a bowl of peas that haven't quite gone fuzzy yet. And you pull all that stuff out, you throw it into a casserole dish, mix it up, pop it in the oven, and you got dinner. Well, Vermilion Drift, I have to admit, is a leftover casserole of a book. I kind of opened the refrigerator door of my imagination and took a look at some ideas that I'd had for the Cork O'Connor series, but had never really gotten around to using. And I ended up pulling out 3 elements from among those things, and decided I would try to create a story around those 3 elements. The 3 elements were this. First one was the Iron Range of Minnesota. I don't know if you guys ever get over to our side of the river, but we got this thing up north called the Iron Range. It's really a remarkable phenomenon, geologic and cultural phenomenon in Minnesota. The Iron Range, most people don't know this, even in Minnesota, but the Iron Range was important not just economically to Minnesota, but it was important to this nation as a whole. Most of the steel that was used in the infrastructure of our nation in the late 1800s and well into the 1900s was made from ore pulled from the Iron Range of Minnesota. All of the armaments that were used in the fighting of World War I and World War II were made from steel that was created from the ore pulled from the Iron Range. The Iron Range of Minnesota has just been extremely important to this entire nation. And the culture of the people who went up there to mine that ore was just an amazing, rich texture of many nationalities. And so it's a very interesting place, very interesting history, and I wanted to share that with the rest of the world. So that was one thing. Second thing was, if you're at all familiar with my series, you may remember that Cork, often in a story, will reference his father. Cork's father was sheriff of Tamarack County when Cork was a boy. And when Cork was 13 years old, his father was killed in the line of duty. Cork becomes a law enforcement officer himself. In fact, he becomes the sheriff of Tamarack County, so he very much follows in his father's footsteps. And I've always thought there must have been a really significant relationship there, a really significant bond between those two that I've always wanted to explore more deeply. And also Cork's relationship with his mother, who was very important in molding Cork into the man he became. So I wanted to explore those relationships that Cork had with his mother and his father more deeply. So that was the second thing. And the third thing, well, I'm a little ashamed of the third thing. But here it is. I thought it was time to write my serial killer book. I don't know how many of you read serial killer books. I don't. For a couple of reasons. One is I think it's too simple a motivation to say, he did it because he was crazy. And also, I like books that build suspense in a more intelligent way. So I typically don't read serial killer books. But the one thing I know about serial killer books is that they sell really well. This was the first of my books to hit the New York Times bestseller list. Serial killer book. That's all I'm saying. So I pulled out those 3 elements. The Iron Range of Minnesota, the Cork's relationship with his folks when he was young, and the serial killer thing. I kind of mixed them all up, and I took a look at it, and boy, it was ugly. And I honestly didn't know how I could construct a story with those 3 things, and I was just about ready to toss the whole mixture out when I had the idea for the hook and pull in Vermilion Drift. The hook and pull. What I mean by this, and every mystery author understands what I'm talking about, the hook and pull is this. As a mystery author, you understand that what you've got to do is hook your reader very quickly and pull them into the story so that they feel compelled to read to the end. The hook and pull. So I had a great idea for the hook and pull for Vermilion Drift. I don't know how many of you have read Vermilion Drift, but I'm going to tell you what the hook and pull is anyway, because I'm not going to give anything away. And I'm hoping I'll hook you, get you into buying it if you haven't already. Here's the hook and pull. Before I do the hook and pull, though, I want to explain a couple of things. First, the title. Vermilion Drift. Vermilion, if you've ever traveled the Iron Range of Minnesota, there's a wonderful highway that goes from Grand Rapids up through Chisholm and Hibbing and all the way over to Virginia. And it's just an extraordinary picture of the Iron Range. And as you travel that highway, you are surrounded by mountains of iron ore tailings. And they're red. They're vermilion. Why? Because iron ore, when it's exposed to the air, oxides. It turns red. So vermilion. Drift, when you're digging an underground mine and you dig a shaft, it's called a sink. When you dig a tunnel off that shaft, it's called a drift. Vermilion Drift. Okay, so the title. One more point of reference. I don't know if any of you are from Minnesota, but, okay, those of us who still live in Minnesota, many of us remember a time back in the early 1990s when, for a very brief period of time, the Department of Energy considered using the abandoned Sudan underground iron mine in northern Minnesota as an alternative site for the storage of nuclear waste. Alternative to Yucca Mountain, storage of nuclear waste. Why? Because it goes half a mile into the earth. It was carved out of the most stable rock formation in all of North America, the Canadian Shield, and there are 50 miles of tunnels already down there for the storage of that crap. You know, it would have been a great idea, except for the fact that any kind of an accident up there would put all kinds of radiation into the Mississippi River, and the whole rest of the nation is screwed. So fortunately, they abandoned that idea. But that was the beginning point for me in my thinking about Vermilion Drift. Here's the hook and pull. The Department of Energy is considering using an underground iron mine, abandoned underground iron mine in northern Minnesota, in Tamarack County, for the storage of nuclear waste. They've sent a team of engineers out there to take a look at the mine to see if it's suitable. Tamarack County is up in arms over this possibility, especially the Ojibwe, whose reservation directly abuts the mine property. Threats have been made against the mining personnel, and Cork O'Connor, who has a one-man security consulting firm, is hired to consult on security for the mine and the mining personnel. His first day on the job, he goes down into the mine, and in a tunnel there, the Vermilion Drift, he finds a room loosely walled off with stones. Inside that room, he discovers the remains of 6 women. 5 of the victims are 40 years old. They date back to the time when the mine was closed and when Cork O'Connor's father was sheriff of Tamarack County. The 6th victim is a week old. When they begin to do the forensic investigation, they discover that the bullets that the last of the victims killed 40 years ago and the most recent victim were both killed by bullets fired from the same gun. And it's the gun that Cork O'Connor's father wore when he was sheriff and that now Cork owns. How was that possible? I had no idea. But I knew it was a great hook.